Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do here on my channel, I cover true crime cases, and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older. So if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click that subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So today's case is one that has definitely been very close to my heart recently. And like I stated before in my first two videos of this year, if you didn't watch those, this month of January 2023, I am just going to be covering cases that had huge updates in them during last year of 2022. This case is one that once I started diving more into it, I could not help myself from tearing up. It will tear at your heartstrings. It's just one of those cases. I went through a lot, and I mean a lot, of newspaper articles from newspapers.com. I basically put in every single day after this case occurred for months and months and went over every article from pretty much every day in the first few months, and then over every article in the next few years and since it occurred. Basically what I'm saying is that I don't think I missed any part of this case. I wanted to really tell this story the best that I could before ultimately going into how there would finally be an arrest in this case after 46 years. This is the case of Lindy Sue Biechler. Lindy Sue Biechler was born Lindy Sue Little on January 31st of 1956 in Lancaster, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, to parents Wayne Little and Eleanor Giese, who separated when she was just 4 years old. Lancaster was her home, the place she took her first breath, and unfortunately her last. She was a girl who changed the lives of the people around her in the most positive way that one could imagine. She had a love for her life and the ones that she cared for most in that life. Her father described her as being a small but strong girl with freckles and a demure, sometimes wistful smile. Lindy had graduated from Conestoga Valley High School in 1973, where she was described as studious, and she was also described as not being very outgoing, but she had a good group of friends around her. She was 19 years old during late fall of 1975, only about 2 months shy of her 20th birthday. Years earlier, she had fallen in love with and married a man named Philip D. Biechler, who was 24 in 1975 when this case takes place. He worked part-time as an agent at Hertz Rent-A-Car and attended Millersville State College as an art student. Lindy, she worked as a clerk at Landis Flower and Gift Shop located at 28 Cottage Avenue, and it was described as being a cozy nook tucked behind Cottage Avenue on the east end of town. She started this job on June 9th of that year, and she loved working there. She had worked quite a few places before, and they were all quite boring to her. She would kind of just make her money and go home, but it wasn't like that with this job. She would do her more secretarial duties early on in the day, then get to the more physically laborious work like lifting stuff, and then she would spend the rest of the day tending to the flowers and the other plants, and that was really the part of working there that she enjoyed the most. It is also quite ironic that she did work in a flower shop because her father said that at the time of her murder, she was truly blossoming. When it came to Lindy and Philip, the couple had been married about 2 years and were known as being well liked by their community, and there was never any indication of domestic difficulties as reported by the Lancaster New Era. Lindy's mother was quoted saying, "Those two kids, they really loved each other. Those two would have made it. They had high morals and high principles, and they lived by them. If any two kids could get together and make it, it was those two." The couple lived together at their Spring Manor apartment on Kloss Drive, right off Millersville Road, apartment 104A. On the evening of Friday, December 5th, 1975, Lindy's uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Merle Little of 109 Wellington Road, were driving back home from a high school basketball game when they decided to stop by the Biechlers' apartment and pay their niece a quick visit. Lindy's aunt decides to get out by herself and see if Lindy is home, while her husband stays behind in the vehicle parked in the front. She goes inside the first floor of the one-bedroom apartment because the door was left open, and she walks into an absolute nightmare. Lindy was found lying face up on the floor not far from the door entering the home. She was wearing blue jeans and a knit top. She had been stabbed repeatedly with a butcher knife, and the butcher knife was found sticking out of her neck. This must have occurred not long after a grocery visit because there were still a few bags of groceries still on the kitchen table. Mrs. Little ran from the apartment as fast as she could, told her husband of her findings, and Manor Township Police were called to the scene that night at 8:42 p.m. An autopsy would be conducted on Lindy, and they discovered that she had been stabbed 11 times with a 4-inch deep wound on her left side, which had punctured an artery, and she ultimately bled to death. These 11 stab wounds had been performed by the butcher knife found in her neck, one that had come from the Biechler's own kitchen. Deputy Coroner Dr. Musselman stated that her time of death was determined to be between 6 to 7 p.m. that night, only an hour or two before Mrs. Little walked into the apartment. I also have to mention a huge part of this and something that is extremely highlighted, and that is that Lindy was a fighter. She fought for her life to the very end, and that was something that was obvious by the look of the apartment. There was a broken lamp and an overturned lamp found in the apartment. Things had been kicked and grabbed for. There was definitely a struggle. Even her own father would go on to say that Lindy was not someone to die without a fight. There was a lot of blood in the home, mostly the living room around the front door, but also on the outside of the door and on the hall floor leading away from the apartment. But there had been no signs of a forced entry into the home. There was no getting around it. It had been a homicide, and a violent one at that. One that this area was not used to. The rest of Lindy's family was notified along with her husband. Shock, anger, sickness, these were the emotions that were going on at the time, and everyone was feeling it. Authorities had an investigation on their hands though, and one of the first things they needed to do was piece together Lindy's day before the attack happened. Lindy did have work earlier during that Friday. Authorities contacted her manager, Robert P. Almond, at Linda's Flower and Gift Shop, and a fellow employee, Diane Hershey. Lindy was described by her fellow workers as being a very happy, outgoing girl. Diane told the Lancaster New Era that Lindy kept talking about Christmas recently. She had been so excited for the upcoming holiday. It was really all she kept talking about. It would later be discovered that Lindy was planning on giving her husband a ceramic palette for his oil paints, and this was a palette that she had actually made for him herself. And Philip was planning on surprising her with a Norwegian elkhound, which was a dog that she wanted for so long and she would have been so excited for. Diane stated, "We always leave work together. We got in the car behind the greenhouse and waved goodbye to each other." Diane had no idea that that would be the last time that she ever saw her friend. Robert described her as a fantastic girl, that his birthday had been the day before, and she was sweet enough to bake him blueberry muffins for it. About Lindy and her husband, he basically said that you couldn't find a nicer couple, and that the couple had been planning on moving in January to Willow Street. As for anything that may have troubled Lindy lately in life, Robert and Diane both agreed that she had been very upset because there had been a few recent deaths in her family, and it really had been weighing on her. It was something that had definitely brought in a lot of sadness, but it wasn't something that she spent every single day thinking about. It was definitely something that was affecting her, but she was trying to grieve properly and remember them when they were alive and the happy memories and kind of move on. But when it comes to talk of possibly anything weighing heavy on her, like a stalker, there was no talk of that. She never made it known to anyone in her life that she thought that somebody had been following her or that she was possibly in danger. Within the first day after the murder, police had spoken to roughly 100 people in connection to this case. Of course, one of the main people questioned was her husband, Philip, but after discovering he had a solid alibi, he had been at work at Hertz during her murder, he was eliminated as a suspect. According to the Intelligencer Journal, not many of the Biechler's neighbors living in the apartment complex wanted to speak publicly. They were all still very shaken up by what happened. Anyone who did speak to reporters claimed that they did not really know the couple and had not heard anything suspicious occurring during Friday night. No screaming, no loud bangs, no sound of a struggle. nothing. Overall, the apartment complex seemed like a rather safe one to live in. From my research, no one had any issues with burglars, loitering, or strange people lingering around the area. Now though, neighbors were terrified, and some were even considering purchasing a gun for their safety just in case the culprit came back. At this time and during the investigation, the front door of the Biechler's apartment had a sign on it that read, "Do not enter. Crime scene." According to an article released by the Lancaster New Era on December 8th, new information was being released to the public regarding the case. Many were wondering if any fingerprints had been found on the handle of the knife. Well, authorities stated that a kitchen towel had been wrapped around the knife's handle, so they couldn't find any prints. They did, though, find a man's size 10 shoe print in some of the blood in the kitchen. They were unsure if this print belonged to the killer or possibly one of the officers or paramedics who came to the scene that day. Lieutenant Harvey West was leading the investigation at this time, and he stated that they were still questioning people. Officers were even looking into past crimes in the area involving stabbings, people who had been released from behind bars for committing such crimes. It was theorized that whoever her attacker, her murderer was, had 1. Waited for her at the apartment. Maybe he knew her schedule and knew her husband would be at work. 2, saw her coming home, knocked on the door, she answered it, and he made his way inside. Or 3, had already been inside of the home and she walked in on him robbing it. Due to there being no signs of a forced entry, it seemed like possibly she had been putting groceries away. He knocked on the door, she opened the door, and he forced his way inside. But they were unsure. The coroner, though, stated that whoever the man was had to have been a strong man, a very large man. Also, if the man had been in the home already with the intentions of stealing, how did he get in the home? And why didn't he steal anything? Officials stated that Lindy's purse with any money inside and all valuable belongings in the home were left behind. They were completely untouched. Well, it would in fact come out later on that Lindy had been raped, so it seemed like that was the motive. They were not 100% sure, but that's what they were leaning towards and still lean towards today, because there are just no signs of there being any other motive. Lindy Sue Biechler was survived by both her parents, Wayne and Eleanor, along with 3 stepsisters and a stepbrother. She would be laid to rest in Boehm's Chapel Cemetery. On Monday, December 8th, Lieutenant Harvey West issued a public appeal for help trying to locate the driver of a car that had been reportedly parked outside the Biechler's apartment on the night of Lindy's murder. He stated that the car was double parked parallel to the sidewalk instead of parked towards the curb like it normally would have been. He said the car would have been blocking some cars in, and it would have been facing north towards West Fairway Drive, that it had been parked in the traveling lane and had its headlights on. The car was being described as a standard-sized, American-made, dark-colored car. By this public appeal, over 200 people had been questioned in relation to her murder. By this time, they had been able to discover a little more about Lindy's day before she got home. They found out that yes, she did leave her job a little before 5:30 p.m., and then she headed in her and her husband's 1968 green Chevrolet Impala to her husband's place of work to pick up a check that he needed to cash. She then headed to the Millersville branch of the Commonwealth National Bank, where she cashed the check. After that, she headed over to do some grocery shopping at John Hurst Village Market, which is a grocery store she usually did her shopping at. Employees in the meat section recall her being at the store somewhere between 6 to 6:30 p.m. There was one lead early on in this case that they thought was pretty promising, and that was when they received a tip from someone working at a local dry cleaners that said that they had an item of clothing that looked like it had blood on it. The garment was handed over to the police, and they sent it off to the lab for testing, and it was ultimately discovered, though, that it was not blood on it at all. At this time, they were still testing fingerprints in the apartment that they had gathered, hoping that maybe one of these fingerprints didn't belong to Lindy or her husband, and they could locate a person of interest in this case. Finally, Chief Sheeler told the Lancaster Era on December 9th that they were still trying to figure out whose shoe print was left at the crime scene and whose car was supposedly spotted near the apartment. He also stated that the phones at the department have not stopped ringing and that they are very proud of the public for the amount of people trying to help in the case. On top of it all, they were also asking anyone from the public to come forward if they spotted anyone Friday night or early Saturday covered in blood around the area. A conference was held on December 15th, and they informed the public that they were not going to be letting everyone know where they were in the case anymore, but they were still working diligently. So much so that they brought on more officers to help in the investigation. After that, they were not really reporting every single day in the paper regarding her murder because they wanted to keep things a little private. They didn't want everyone knowing what was going on, so they didn't jeopardize anything. And because the main bits of information that they felt crucial for the public to know or keep her memory alive had already been gone over numerous times in the papers. Christmas came and went. New Year's came and went. It wouldn't really be until the new year when new information arose that they thought maybe could be connected to the brutal slaying of Lindy Sue Biechler. In mid-January of 1976, an 18-year-old named Mark Dominic Capolupo was arrested with 14 charges filed against him for the brutal sexual attacks on 4 females. They thought maybe he could be connected to what happened to Lindy, but police discovered that he had been at work during the time of Lindy's murder. Now, I dove into this case a little bit more, and he was convicted of the prior crimes. And in July of that same year, he tried to flee from the Lancaster County Prison, and he was shot dead. So that's kind of the end of that. But the next incident that they thought could possibly be connected to Lindy's case occurred in March. On March 5th of 1976, 43-year-old Mary Schinzig was stabbed to death in her home located in Columbia in Lancaster County. And a lot of people thought that maybe the person responsible for Mary's murder could be the person responsible for Lindy's. Well, on March 16th, 33-year-old Kenneth Dale Arndt was charged in relation to the murder, and police informed the public that they did not think that he was involved in Lindy's case in any way. This case after that was kind of at a standstill for a while. Tips were still coming into the department, but they were becoming less and less as the days went on, and there were still just so many questions that needed answers. Then something absolutely disgusting happened in late December of that year of 1976, and that was when Lindy's family went to visit her grave for Christmas, and her tombstone had been completely vandalized. Someone had tried to break pieces of it off, possibly trying to break the entire thing in half, and it was marked up with red spray paint. The police took this very seriously, and I'm glad that they did, but who did it? Was it the actual killer or possibly someone just trying to torment her poor loved ones? They had no idea. During the next year, in January, law enforcement received a letter that claimed to be urgent. And this letter claimed to have been written by Lindy's killer, and this person also took responsibility for vandalizing her tombstone. The police dove into this, and it looked like whoever did it was trying to mess with them because they would come to the conclusion that the letter was just a complete hoax, which we have covered so many cases here on my channel that have involved people doing things that I don't even want to say just are disrespectful, but just heartless and horrible. People vandalizing graves, people sending in letters to authorities pretending to have some involvement when I don't even understand the point of that, to mess up an investigation, just waste the authorities' time, to break the family's hearts even more and get their hopes up that possibly there will be an arrest soon and the case will be solved. People calling authorities or calling their family, pretending to be a person who was missing or pretending to have some firsthand information. Basically, I don't understand what's wrong with people sometimes. Through the years, there had been dozens of theories in this case. They thought for a period of time that possibly the serial killer Gerald Eugene Stano could have been involved after he was arrested for his crimes, but he was officially ruled out as a suspect in her case early on in 1983. During the next year, in 1984, the district attorney's office got in contact with a supposed psychic. They paid her $2,000 to hopefully give them some promising information. She sat there, she started describing a man that she said was responsible for Lindy's murder. Authorities took note of all the features of this man that the psychic was picking up on, and it's obvious that she had been referring to Mark Dominic Capilupo, who we already know had been ruled out as a suspect. So $2,000 down the drain, and it didn't get them anywhere new. It would be another 5 years until something else would really arise in this case. On April 2nd, 1989, during the very early stages of DNA, it was released to the Lancaster Sunday News that investigators were trying to analyze a dried blood stain that could have possibly belonged to Lindy, but possibly belonged to her killer. And they were going to analyze it further, but they told the public that this sample was completely unable to be analyzed. In June of 1992, Detective Joseph P. Giese retires as head detective of Lancaster City Police. But he doesn't just retire and stop working altogether. No, he actually gets hired as a county detective to primarily focus on unsolved murders. And the first one he really starts looking at is Lindy's. And he worked tirelessly through the years on her case. During the year of 2006, so we're skipping a few years, investigators working on her case decide that it's time to get in contact with a group I recently discussed in my Boy in the Box video, and that group being VDOC, which, if you don't know much about VDOC, they are a crime-solving group located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is an area about 70 miles east of Lancaster. Even though so many people were working on this case, and I mean very influential, very intelligent, very hard-working people, it would still take advancements in technology to solve this one finally. This eventually became the oldest unsolved murder case in Lancaster County. A school teacher in Lancaster named Christy Murack was murdered only a few days before Christmas during the year of 1992. Her case would eventually be completely solved years later after an arrest was made in 2018. The arrest was made after taking DNA found at the crime scene and conducting genetic genealogy, which, if you don't know about that, it's something that we talk about quite frequently here on my channel. It is taking an individual's DNA, creating a DNA profile, entering that DNA profile into a genetic database, and finding family members of that person, sometimes creating an entire family tree just to locate one person. They narrowed in on a man named Raymond Charles Rowe, or his DJ name was DJ Freeze, and investigators followed him for a while, and after he discarded a water bottle and a piece of chewing gum, they were able to obtain his DNA from those items and discover it matched with the DNA found at the crime scene back in 1992. They had also worked previously with Parabon Nano Labs and used that DNA to see what her killer possibly looked like at the time of the murder, and it did look a bit like Raymond Charles Rowe in the early 90s. So after this information was released to the public, this huge update in an unsolved murder right in Lancaster, Philip Biechler wondered if maybe they could do the same technology and possibly solve Lindy's murder. Well, after working with Parabon Nano Labs on September 5th of 2019, they released 2 photos of what her killer may have looked like at the ages of 25 and also what he would look like at 65 many years later. According to NPR.org, the DNA that was collected from Biechler's clothing was then sent to Parabon, where CeCe Moore used it to hone in on likely suspects, specifically those with ancestral ties to Gasparina, Italy, a small town in the southern part of the country. Moore said about 2,300 people with Italian genetic ties were living in Lancaster County around the time of the killing. CeCe Moore, who we have discussed before, who is an incredible genetic genealogist, then used public records to better narrow down who Lindy's killer could have been. She ended up with one individual and sent over her findings to authorities. When they saw the suspect, they were a bit surprised because this was a man that was never on their radar. And the way that they caught him was quite similar to the way that they caught Christy Marak's killer. Investigators followed the man closely for some time, and one day they watched him and his wife as they were waiting for a flight at the Philadelphia International Airport. And the man was drinking out of a coffee cup, and he discards the coffee cup in the trash at the airport. They take the cup out of the trash, and that would be what they used to obtain DNA from to compare to DNA that they had on file from the murder, which that DNA would be semen that they found from Lindy's underwear. On January 18th of 2012, the Lancaster County District Attorney announces to the public that they arrested 68-year-old David Vincent Sinopoli. This is a man who was never a suspect, never a person of interest, but come to find out, he had actually lived in the same apartment complex as Lindy and her husband at the time of the murder. When it comes to him having any sort of criminal past, from what I found, the only thing brought up was about 18 years ago or so, when he was given a year-long probation after spying on a woman who was naked during a spray tan at the salon that his own wife owned. That was really the only criminal thing on his record, and yes, it's absolutely horrible, but I'm saying that there's no other information about him being involved in a sexual assault or murder. That was really the only criminal thing on his record, and everyone who knew him never brought up him acting inappropriate or violent in any way, which that explains why back in the year 2000, when they entered the DNA into CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System, or the FBI's DNA database for criminals, there was never a match. He could have done something else through the years, but he was never caught for it. This was a man that continued to live in the area, continued his life while this investigation proceeded, and her loved ones suffered for years. District Attorney Heather Adams said during the press conference, "This arrest would not have been possible without the assistance of CC Moore and Parabon Nanolabs. We are incredibly grateful for the work that they do and their commitment to securing justice for victims and their loved ones. The Lancaster County District Attorney's Office also wishes to thank everyone involved in this case from beginning to end. There has been a never-ending pursuit of justice in this case that has led us to identifying and arresting Sinopoli. Lindy Sue Biechler was on the minds of many throughout the years. Certainly, law enforcement never forgot about Lindy Sue, and this arrest marks the first step to obtaining justice for her and holding her killer responsible." This huge update in this case has brought so much relief to Lindy's surviving loved ones, but unfortunately her father did pass away in the year of 2000 and her mother passed away in 2007, which is something that I always find so devastating in cases like this that weren't solved for so long, because a lot of the time the parents are not alive to see the outcome. This case happened in 1975. Christy's case happened in 1992. They were both from the same area, an area that was so affected by these murders. And within a few years, it seems both are solved because of the method of genetic genealogy. But that is the case of Lindy Sue Biechler. And just like the other two videos that I did this month, when there are possibly more updates, and of course, like the last video I did, when there is a final verdict for this case, I will be doing some sort of update video. So if you want to stay up to date with that, make sure to hit the subscribe button on my channel. I hope you all have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about Lindy's case, and I will see you all in the next one.